Mr. Speaker, and thank you for asking for order in this place. It is always difficult after such things as votes, and I had expected someone else to finish their time, so I was a little caught off guard. It's an honor to rise in this place and speak to Bill C-21. I'm going to try to deal with a number of complex issues in a short amount of time and hope it works. Mr. Speaker, it relates to C-21, and that's the use of firearms. And I want to comment on some of the discussion during question period about the Portapique shootings. I think it's important to reflect on what I take away from the news media at this time when I have a moment to say it. It's obviously not ever appropriate to interrupt, to think that there's no chance of interrupting question period, to put his perspective. As a Nova Scotian, originally, I was devastated, as we all were, by the shootings at Portapique. It happens that the RCMP officer who was killed, Heidi Stevenson, was a friend of mine, and I know her mother well. It was awful to watch what looked like, and I think that we'll see what the mass casualty inquiry produces as a result. But it's pretty clear to me, and I want to speak clearly to this, that the RCMP in Nova Scotia failed the public badly. I know a commission is looking at this, but they had information that was not shared. They failed to put out a warning. 22 people were killed. And I know that this inquiry is very important to all the families who lost loved ones. But what appears to me to have been an uncalled for assumption by some members in question period to put in question the integrity of the Minister of Public Safety and Security and the Prime Minister's office. I'm not an apologist for Liberals, but I thought that was not what the evidence reveals. When I look at the CBC reports of what they found out, it appears to me that in the aftermath of the shooting, the Nova Scotia RCMP was all too quick to try to obscure facts from the public rather than to reveal them. And it appears to me that the RCMP Commissioner, Brenda Lucki, provided more transparency, provided real information. And if anyone in PMO instructed her anything, it seems to me it would have been tell everybody what's happened, just be transparent. I am very concerned that we let any false rumors or assumptions to besmirch reputations of others, including Brenda Lucki, be spread in this place. It appears to me, as in a number of other shooting incidents, that sometimes the police get it wrong. They didn't move in Uvalde, Texas, when they should have to save those children. And there's a common denominator that I discern, that when the RCMP are slow to move, or the police are slow to move, it's because the people they would have to deal with are heavily armed. I don't find the police slow to move against unarmed protesters. I don't find the police slow to move against Indigenous people. But they delay when they are at risk for their own safety all too often. Not always, but all too often. In the case of the Nova Scotia shooter, we know his name. I don't want to repeat it because of the crimes he committed, but he was well known to the RCMP. And in the early hours after the shooting, the RCMP put out, Nova Scotia RCMP, not the commissioner, put out false statements that he was not known to them. He was known personally to them. They had warnings about him. And this goes to make the bridge and the connection to Bill C-21, this goes to a number of the provisions of C-21 that if C-21 had been law at that time, could have saved lives, which is to say that when the neighbors of the multiple shooter in Nova Scotia, let's just call him the evil dentist for the time being, his neighbors reported him to the RCMP on numerous occasions, but no action was taken. Neighbors were so frightened of him that they literally sold their dream home and moved away, and yet nothing was done to even conduct a search of the property, or even to inquire, why is he buying a car that looks just like an RCMP vehicle? Why does he dress up like an RCMP officer? These details were known in the community, and a number of them were reported to law enforcement authorities. Could this bill have made a difference there? I think it could have, but only if the RCMP or local police are prepared to use the information that comes to them, which is why one of the provisions I like particularly in this bill, I'll go to it here in my copy of the bill, is the ability to seek an ex parte motion on the strength of concerns from people who are concerned that that some person may be threatening others, not just with firearms, by the way, Mr. Speaker, but with crossbows. This is really important, or with explosive substances. This is really important. This is found at the application for an emergency prohibition officer in Section 4 of this Act that would amend Section 110 of Firearms Act. I think it's really important that we recognize what an ex parte order is. That means that someone can go to the court without notifying the person they're scared of that they're going to court, and that there can be an emergency search and seizure without a warrant. Now, this violates every instinct of my being, searches without warrants, because I'm a civil liberties kind of lawyer. But when you look at the history of violence from people who had people in the community know. So there's a lot about this law that I hope we have time to study thoroughly. I want to speak to that. But the red flag and yellow flag provisions, the ability to go to a court, to go to a judge, and without fear of retribution from someone who's well armed, who has crossbows. It may be in cases, as we know all too frequently, of intimate partner violence. It may be in cases of the random and reckless killing of others, as in the case of Portapique, or the desperately sad case of Lyle Desmond, who killed his wife and mother and kids, and he was, of course, suffering from PTSD from his service in our armed forces and didn't get the help he needed, even though he'd gone to a hospital the day before. There are many and varied circumstances when the presence of firearms in a home makes the difference between life and death, and where the provisions in C-21 will indeed, I hope, save lives. But I want to turn to a process question at this point, Madam Speaker, which is why rush this bill? I am very concerned that we just invoked time allocation on a bill that we'd only had before us for debate for 3 hours. This bill is complex, it has many moving parts, and the government itself has changed its views on key aspects of this bill between its version last year at C-10, its version last year was also C-21, and its version this year, C-21. They changed their minds, and I think wisely, on the question of voluntary versus mandatory buybacks. They've changed their minds, I think, wisely on the question of any jurisdiction other than the federal government regulating guns. Those are not wise choices, and this bill has changed in that way. Bills get better when they're studied. Any attempt to achieve consensus will improve a bill. A decision on the government side that the Conservatives are only going to obstruct and delay and filibuster is entirely a justified conclusion given conduct so far in this Parliament. But that doesn't excuse shortening the time for debate, shortening the time for study, shortening the time to try to find consensus in this place, which is possible. And again, Madam Speaker, I want to put forward some of the things that would help achieve consensus. One is to observe the rules, which are our rules. It does not take changing the standing order to ban the practice of reading a speech. How does that connect? Well, when a whip or House leader in a party knows that they can rally however many MPs they have, serve like cannon fodder, here you go, here's your speech, you're giving it in 10 minutes. You can clog up the works of this place with people giving speeches. Mais si nous avons le pratique toujours avec nos règlements, que ce n'est...
But if we have the practice that it is prohibited to read a speech, then what has to happen is that you have to express your own thoughts in a debate, and that will cancel out the practice of seeing a number of members speaking on each bill.
So that we can have real debate among fewer MPs, because fewer MPs will be able to stand up and speak without a written speech. The next thing we need to do is consider how many days we sit in this place. We have this panic this time of year, every year, as though there's going to be disaster that strikes if we don't adjourn on a day set. We could sit for more days. I have 15 seconds left, but I'll just say we sit for far fewer days than the U.S. Congress and even fewer days in the British Parliament. I voted against time allocation because this is a complicated bill, and we should take the time it needs to respect each other and come up with the best bill. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member from Saanich Gulf Islands for her intervention today and her thoughts and her reflections on this. I do have a question for her about her criticism of the requirement for time allocation. I know that this member spends a lot of time in the House, and she certainly is aware of what goes on in this House. And I'm sure she's certainly aware of the fact that on numerous occasions, Conservatives are continually using any tactic possible to just literally ground the government to a halt. They don't even pick one or two issues that will be the hills they die on. They seem to want to just be willing to do anything at any point to stop debate. I'm wondering if she can, given her comments and her concern for time allocation, if she can reflect on that.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Yeah, to my honourable friend from Kingston, the Islands, I've seen that. I remember, I think it was sometime before the 2019 election, we had a quick move by a Conservative who was very pleased with the move to sort of hoist a motion that meant that the private member's bill on declaring a Canadian day to acknowledge our Spanish heritage, managed to get it for a mandatory debate that lasted 5 hours. Now, people were running out of things to say. There was one person saying, I like a sombrero, I make gazpacho. There was nothing to say, and everybody was in support of the motion. It was clearly a delay tactic. But again, we have to work harder to preserve our basic core principles and values in this place, which is that every MP should participate in reasonable debate within which we respect each other. And when the Conservatives, and it's not just the Conservatives, in another Parliament, it'll be somebody else, we can't allow the worst conduct of any particular Parliament to drive lesser rights for members of Parliament in the next Parliament.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Cumberland Colchester.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the member opposite for her intervention. I think there are some really germane facts about the Mass Casualty Commission that really people need to understand, since the member brought it forward. Certainly that action was perpetrated by illegal guns, not by a legal gun owner, Madam Speaker. So I think that's important to point out. I think the other important thing here to point out, Madam Speaker, is really to talk about what we need to talk about here in this House is so important that we all get a chance to do it, and the time allocation that the government wants to do with respect to this bill is absolutely ridiculous when we continuously see ministers misleading this House with information that's very clear, and we now know that we can't trust anything that they say. So how do we expect to put these bills forward, Madam Speaker? That's the point of debating this at the current time. Thank you.
Violence.
To my honourable colleague for Cumberland Colchester, of course, in whose riding these killings took place. The Mass Casualty Commission has revealed some things, and we have to wait for their final conclusions. I think it was a mistake not to require that the RCMP officers, all of them who participated in the events, were part of the inquiry and testifying. I know the families, some of the families have even withdrawn participation because they're so disappointed with the path of the inquiry. So what I'm going to say is that whether the guns were legal or illegal, many neighbors tried to tell the RCMP they were scared of this man, and nothing was done. And C-21 will help deal with that.
L'honorable, questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Quickly, please. Yes, I'll be quick, I promise. I would like to thank the member for Saanich Gulf Islands for her speech. And I agree with her. I do not agree with dilatory measures, and I think that we should not have time allocation either, because then we can't get into things deeply. So when we were asked to vote twice rather than one to decide which Conservative member should speak, I'm still stunned. I'd like to know what she thinks.
Has 50 seconds to respond.
C'est plusieurs temps, merci.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to thank my colleague for the bloc, Berthier-Masquinongé, that's right. I think the time allocation is an error in a democracy. it is necessary to have the time to truly study issues. Bill C-21 is important, and I think I'm in favor of it. But there are a number of issues in the bill where I think we need some changes to make improvements, particularly with regard to people who use firearms for sports, who have absolutely legal intentions. We have to make as many efforts as possible to find solutions together. And that is why I am against time allocation.